Eric sent in this data and it would like it converted into a flat file using Power Query. Close this ribbon and get a better look at this data. Typically, when we take a data set and turn it into a flat file, we don't need totals. One reason we'd turn this into a flat file is to get different totals, all kinds of totals. So we would get rid of this totals column, this net income row, the total revenues row, anything that's got a total in it. In this data set, we need to get the revenues out to one side, the expenses out to one side, so that we can have them fill up this column so that we know that expenses admin, and then expenses materials, then revenues refunds, revenues grants. What's going to be tricky is getting this date out of here and getting it into its own column. So those are some of the things we need to do. So let's get on with the get on. This workbook is already saved to my desktop. I am going to open a brand new workbook. Here's my brand new workbook, and let's go on into Power Query. Data, new query, from file, from workbook. That's where we're starting. Where is my workbook? It's on my desktop, and it's called Eric Workbook 1. Double click. Which sheet do I want? I want the example sheet. There's a preview of the data. Edit the query. Okay. Where do we want to start? First, let's get rid of this column. Remove. Now let's use the first row as headers. Let's go to transform. Use first row as headers. Right. Let's call this Rev Expenses. Let's get rid of some of the rows that we don't need. Anything in this column that's null, we can get rid of because it's null all the way across. Select here and unselect null. We don't need total expenses, our net income, our total revenues. Let's get rid of net, total revenues, total expenses. Okay. We don't need net income. Okay. Now we want this header revenues and expenses to come out of here and be in their own column. I'm going to add a conditional column. If revenue expenses column contains a colon, then grab whatever is in the revenue expenses column. Okay. Right click, fill down. Otherwise, null. Okay. Right click, fill down. Got it. I'm going to move this column over. And we don't need that colon anymore. I'm going to go to home, replace values, find a colon and replace it with nothing. Okay, that colon is gone. Now I need a column with this date in it. Okay, add a column, conditional column. I'm going to say date. and go to the revenue expenses column again. If it equals revenues, colon, then grab what's in downtown. Otherwise, null. We need, looks like it needs to be, is case sensitive, revenues. Okay, now we have it. Now I want to right click, fill down. Great. Now let's set this as a date. Good. Let's slide this over. We don't need this row anymore. We don't need the revenues and the date anymore. We don't need that expenses header anymore. So we can filter for those. Expenses, revenues. Now let's call this category, and this will be called detail. This is text, date. This will be currency. Now, what we need here is to get the downtown, northeast, and west in their own column. So I'm going to highlight category, hold down my control key, get date and detail. I'm going to transform unpivot other columns. Beautiful. So we've got revenues, the date, purchases, downtown, and convert this to currency. Convert this. This is text. Let's call this location. We've got what we want. We can filter for 0. Anything that's not 0, okay. And now this is just a matter of what order we want the columns in. So we can put the date on the end. What if we put the location here? This revenues, detail, value, and then go ahead and close and load to the workbook. There's our data. I'm gonna turn this into currency, home, dollars, pin that down. Great. So now we could do whatever we want with this data. Let's do a pivot table. New worksheet. And what if we put the location in rows and category, columns, and then our value here. Now we have a net of everything. Home, $100. Okay. Now we have just a net with no details, just expenses and revenues. That's all. And if we did want detail, we could put detail here. And if we don't, then get rid of them. Or what we could do is add slicers. Insert slicers. Let's see, we want, how about a category and a detail slicer? Okay. Now, if we want to just look at revenues and gift revenue or refunds, we've got it. Clear those slicers, go back to our original data. Okay, Eric, there is a solution for taking your report and converting it into a flat file. And guess what? Sometimes reality can hit a fellow so hard and make his beard fall off. So here's what happened. We did work with Eric Workbook 1. And I set up a query that pointed it to that one workbook. Now I have 2 more. So look at this. Workbook 1, Workbook 2, Workbook 3. And of course, we'd like to bring all of that data together in one place. And how we're going to do it. That query that I just created, I'm going to put it to a dedicated folder. So any data that's in that folder is going to be brought in to this main workbook. Okay, let's create the folder. New folder, Eric data. Let's call it that. And I'm going to put one workbook in it. All right, so let's set it there. Now we're ready to do the query pointing to that folder. Data, new query, from file, from folder. Now it wants me to navigate to the folder, browse. It's on my desktop. And I call it Eric Data. Okay. Okay. There is the workbook. Edit. Now I've got to tell Power Query what to bring in and what data to keep. So I could keep the name of the workbook. I could keep the date, all of this jazz, but no, I don't want all of that. I want to right click and remove other columns. I'm keeping the binary. Remove other columns. And I want to add a custom column. I'm going to call this import. And I have to write a formula. And that formula is going to be equals Excel dot workbook, open parentheses, and then double click content, close parentheses. Okay. Now I'm going to expand this column. And it's asking, what do I want brought in? I don't want the name brought in. I want the data brought in. Unselect and select data. I don't want to make this prefix. Okay. Expand. Okay. There is our data. I don't need the binary column anymore, so I'll right click that and get rid of it. Now I just have to redo those steps I did previously. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now I've completed the query. Let's put our pivot table back. Insert pivot table. Okay. Close this. Location in rows, value in values, category in columns. Call this currency. Let's change the color of this. Call it that way. Okay. And then let's put in our slicers, detail, category. Okay. Okay. Now let's see if this is going to work. Slide this down. Let's slide in Eric Workbook 2. Here is our data. Now let's get our queries back. Show queries. This is the query that we made just now. Refresh it. All right. See, we've got January and February in here now. Great. Let's go to our pivot table. Refresh the pivot table. Oh. All right. Let's do some more with this pivot table. Close this query. Put the date in the rows. Yeah. Now we've got January, February. All right. Let's grab March. Let's see. Let's get our queries back. Data, show queries. I'm going to get rid of this query because we don't need it anymore. Delete it. Delete. Okay. This is the only one we want. And I'm going to right click, refresh. Let's go to the pivot table. Refresh the pivot table. Nice. See, Power Query getting transformed. This is the power. We got the data. We have what we need. Now, this grand total column in this pivot table is doing the wrong thing. It's adding expenses and revenues. That's not right. So I'm going to go to Design, Grand Totals, and turn that off for columns. We have a dedicated folder where we can put these monthly reports and we don't have to go and clean them every doggone time. Now here's something that's important for you to know. Queries have file paths. And when I set up a query, it has file paths that are dedicated to my computer. So you'll get errors if you open a workbook that has my file paths in it. So I want to show you how to fix that. I'm going to use an example of if I take this Eric data folder and move it from my desktop and move it into this queries folder. Now I'm going to open the Eric workbook. Now if I refresh the query, let's do that. Data, show queries, refresh. See, there's already an error. See, it says data source not found. Here's what I have to do. I have to edit the query. I'm going to go to source. Now I'm going to browse to where the folder is now. It's inside queries and Eric data. Okay. OK. Now we're all set. The file path is correct. Let's close and load. Everything's good.